Hello and welcome to the Joe Ligato Show. I'm your host, Dr. Joe Ligato. And today we're going to be talking about an article from Yahoo News on how Deutsche Bank's top minds put US recession chance near 100% and say avoiding a hard landing would be historically unprecedented. And so it appears as if US economists may have popped the champagne corks on a soft landing too early, at least according to Deutsche Bank. The German multinational bank's top research team believes Washington has sparked a boom bust cycle that is now nearing its end stage. So here's the way that I view the boom bust cycle. And you're welcome to disagree with me here, but this is what I've seen based off of observing the boom bust cycle. The boom is where people try a bunch of new things, they innovate in a ton of different ways, and some of them work to create a good time. The bust cycle, though, is where pruning has to happen, where some ideas didn't work particularly well and they need to be cut completely so that new ideas can come and take their place. And so I think instead of getting rid of the boom bust cycle, I actually think the boom bust cycle is a good idea to a certain extent. Now, when you have government interference, and I kind of sound like a libertarian right now, but when you have government interference, you can mess up the natural process of the boom and bust cycle. And we've seen that especially with the 2007-2008 financial crisis, where things that were meant to fail became too big to fail. And when they became too big to fail, the natural bust part of the boom bust cycle was not able to remove the things that weren't working in the economy. Instead, what happened was, one, no one got in trouble, and two, the problems were never fixed. And three, because all other currencies and all other economies are downstream of the United States and the United States dollar, what ended up happening was the United States just pushed the consequences of its actions and of its miscalculations down the line to other nations and other economies. And so the boom bust cycle serves a functional purpose. You're supposed to grow and you're supposed to try things, and that's the boom. But some things won't work, and they need to be pruned. They need to be removed from the economy, from the marketplace. And that's the bust cycle. And so the boom bust cycle, very functional if left on its own. If things become too big to fail, it's inevitable that things will go wrong, because the next boom bust cycle, the problems from the former boom bust cycle were not properly taken care of. They were not properly handled. And so what we're going to see is a bigger bust, because the bust last time was withheld, was slowed down, was halted. The pruning that needed to occur for ideas, structures of the economy were not properly pruned, were not properly taken care of. So the German multinational bank's top research team believes Washington has sparked a boom bust cycle that is now nearing its end stage. In its house view, the recession slated to arrive as soon as October is the inevitable consequence of a series of aggressive rate hikes designed to extinguish the very flames of inflation that policymakers ignited through their own actions during the COVID pandemic. So when you're trying to prop things up and you have access to a currency where you can just print it and countries around the world will continue to demand your currency in more and more amounts, what you can do is you can hold off the inevitable backslide of certain parts of your economy by just throwing money at the problem. But that doesn't rid yourself of the problem. It just means that the next boom bust cycle, those problems will arise. And so that's what America did. It put a band-aid over the problem by just doing QE, which is quantitative easing. And they talk about quantitative tightening as if it's a theoretical concept, because at this point, the United States continues to have to throw money at the problem because the problems are never resolved. Because at this point, whenever you allow the United States to resolve its own problems, allow it to go through a natural bust, part of the boom bust cycle, what you're going to see is that the United States can't withstand it anymore. They can't hold up the system. The system is a house of cards that is inevitably going to fall whenever the quantitative easing stops, whenever they quit throwing money at the problem, whenever they quit putting a band-aid on the problem. So as soon as October, this problem is likely to arise. Avoiding a hard landing would be historically unprecedented, warned Group Chief Economist David Folkerts Landau in a research report entitled "The Clock is Ticking," published on Wednesday. So what they're saying here is you can't just completely avoid removing bad parts of your economy. It has to happen. You can push it down so it's someone else's problem down the line, which is what typically happens in election-based economies, but you can't actually stop it from happening. You're just kicking the can down for someone else to deal with. This bleak view contrasts with the recent investor bullishness that the Federal Reserve has seemingly pulled off the impossible by cooling off an overheated economy without sparking a recession and leaving only deflated asset prices as collateral damage, a non-recession recession, as private equity firm Apollo Global Management called it last month. Germany's only bulge bracket bank uses an indicator that attempts to measure the probability of a recession in the next 12 months. Currently, it is handicapping the chances of a contraction in the United States economy, economic activity, near 100%. In other words, a virtual certainty. But yes, America is going to have a recession, and people keep going, well, the recession hasn't happened yet, so it's not going to happen. That's not how these things work. What's going to happen is, if a recession hasn't happened yet, that means that when the recession comes, it's going to be an even worse recession because all they're doing is pushing off the recession. They're not fixing the problems in any way, shape, or form. They're putting off the recession. But in order for this to occur, one thing has to happen. First, consumers must exhaust their last of their savings stored up from the COVID lockdown. No one has actual savings anymore. Everyone is massively in debt, trillions upon trillions of dollars of credit card debt, student loans, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, there isn't any savings left. And that's the thing where when you're calculating how much money an economy has, you're not only calculating the actual amount they have, but also the amount of debt they're in. And so not only do Americans not have money, but they're going into debt in order to continue to buy things. And that has to end at some point. You can't just continually go into debt, which for some reason, modern monetary theory, MMT, considers that quantitative easing can just happen forever, and that's just not the case. These will not be depleted until nearer year end, so things are going to script for our Q4 recession timeline. Okay, so fourth quarter this year, there's going to be a recession, so potentially next month. Additional headwinds in the latter half of the year will come from the government mandate for college graduates to resume repaying their federal student debt. So as if there wasn't enough debt, we have more debt that's coming. A ton of people have debt that's just been postponed, but they're going to have to start making payments. So for more than the past 3 years, there's been a moratorium on payments and interest accrual in place due to the pandemic. Fed reversal expected for March with aggressive easing to come. Worse, Deutsche estimates the United States will stay there in the year to come. So they're considering a recession to start probably October or maybe a little bit later, and it'll last for all of 2024. Just as the November presidential election campaign kicks off with the Iowa caucus. Okay, so now they're saying that not only is there going to be a recession, but it's going to probably heavily impact Joe Biden and his chance for re-election. That's why a lot of Democrats are scrambling right now, because they have to figure out a better candidate, because, I mean, what else can they do when there's going to be a huge recession? They have to have a scapegoat, and the scapegoat is typically the figurehead of the nation, which is Joe Biden at this point. In fact, it believes the U.S. will be the only leading industrial nation to see its economy shrink in 2024. So again, if you're having great power competition between the United States and China and the United States and Russia, having a shrinking economy at this point is not going to be good. It's very scary for the United States at this point, because they just don't have any wiggle room to grow their economy, because they're already spread as thin as they can be because of the debt. Both individual debt, various business debt, and the nation state's debt. When activity will contract by 0.4% after adjusting for inflation. By comparison, it should still grow by 1.4% this year, according to Folkerts Landau's team. Other G7 countries have little reason to cheer either, though. The rosiest 2024 performance could top out at a tepid 0.8%. So people were considering 5% growth from places like China to be an absolute disaster for China. But then you have all these other countries that have negative growth, or at most like 0.8% growth. And it's like, well, That's not good. And that 0.8% growth is in Japan. It's not even a European country. So both the Germany and the Eurozone as a whole should expand at a rate of just half of 1%. I honestly think that Germany will shrink. They're deindustrializing at such a rapid rate that they will probably shrink next year. Deutsche believes that businesses and consumers have not yet adjusted to the current high interest rate regime following a decade or more, with rates either negative or effectively zero, as well as near continuous quantitative easing across the United States and Europe. Geopolitical tensions, in particular with regard to the war in Ukraine, as well as food price inflation from a possible El Nino weather phenomenon, could pose additional curveballs that are difficult to calculate but could have major implications for growth. Markets might, however, brush the disappointing performance aside, as the bank expects the Federal Reserve will embark on an aggressive policy easing cycle starting in March that brings the Fed funds rate from its 5.4% terminal level down to 2.625 in the third quarter. On Wednesday, the Fed did not hike for the first time after 10 straight meetings, but I mean, they're going to have to continue to hike rates if they want to ease inflation, which they want to get inflation down to 2%. So what's going to happen? You want to ease inflation, but you also don't want the economy to fall into recession. You're going to have one of those two things, right? As a result, the S&P 500, which typically prices in future developments roughly 6 months in advance, should finish this year at 4,500, up from 4,373 currently, and 3,840 at the start of this year. We expect the grind higher to be choppy. Deutsche cautions. So this article was originally featured in fortune.com as well. So interesting developments here. But I guess I want to leave you with the thought that just because a recession hasn't happened doesn't mean a recession won't happen for this boom and bust cycle. The longer the bust part is pushed off, the harder the recession is going to be. And I frankly do not think that this recession, and we've already been kind of in a low-grade recession as well, but the longer this is pushed off, the harder the recession is going to be, the harder the bust cycle is going to be, and I don't think America is going to recover from it. That's why I've left America. I've taken all my money out of the US dollar. I'm completely confident that, and this is not financial advice in whatever shape or form, but I am completely confident on a personal level that United States is not going to be doing well in the upcoming months and years. So thank you for sticking with me throughout this video, as hopefully you've learned something about our economic system in the West and how things are changing coming forward with the boom bust cycle and how that will likely impact the rest of the world as well. Thank you for sticking with me. I hope you have a good rest of your day. Please like this video. Please subscribe to our channel. Please leave a comment in the comment box. Any comments, critiques, things like that. So hope you have a good day. Bye.